Solar Warden went active 1980, 1981. It was funded in large part by SDI through President Reagan, though that money was funneled off in many different programs. Solar Warden was developed to do exactly what its namesake says, to police our solar system. We were now able, we had the technology to prevent these interloper ET races from coming into our solar system, grabbing our people and leaving. We could now stop them. So Solar Warden was developed and began to do its job of policing the solar system. At the same time, we had the interplanetary corporate conglomerate, which was made up of all of these military-industrial complex corporations. We have all of these other programs that are developing technology at the same time and are developing much, much more advanced technologies. So advanced, in fact, that there are ET races that come here to trade for our technology.
Corey Goode is the one insider I found whose testimony ties all of these different threads together. I've heard Corey have knowledge of something that each of the different other insiders I've spoken to had said to me in the past. Nobody else had ever done that before, and that was fascinating because I had not put this information online. The information was proprietary. It was things that I'd heard over the course of conversations that could have gone on for many, many dozens of hours over time, spreading across about 20 years worth of my own past history.
I think they chose children for these MyLab programs in several different ways. They had to profile them. They definitely used standardized testing and a few other ways to identify whether they had a skill or a talent that they needed. Then they would check out their family life. They preferred children from broken homes or from homes that were not harmonious because the children are used to getting smacked around, they're used to stressful environments, and the parents were not always as attentive as other parents. Therefore, the children were able to handle a lot more stress, and the parents may not notice, certain behavior in the kids. Well, I guess you would say a typical day, if there is a typical day in the life of a MyLab, would be your parents dropping you off at school, just like any other day, and except that day, you're pulled aside and told you're going to go on a field trip. You're in a special education class or an accelerated learning class, you're special. You're being taken off campus to go, look at dinosaurs. Well, you are taken, put in a van. Usually a person is driving that is military looking, sometimes in uniform. They would then drive us for a little over an hour to Carswell Air Force Base. We parked inside this hangar that was a motor pool, and we walked to the back, and there was an elevator. And the elevator went down quite a ways. And when we came out, we were underground in a Cold War era type bunker. That would then lead us to another set of elevators that would take us down where we would get on underground trams that would there were trains that would take us over 500 miles per hour anywhere in the world. When we were sent to one of these locations through one of these shuttles, we would then go through, sometimes because of travel time, we would only get 45 minutes of training in, sometimes 2-3 hours of training in. Then we would go back, be debriefed, and they would give us a chemical through a shot, and they would sit us in a chair in front of a movie screen and basically hypnotize us and give us a screen memory of going to a museum and looking at dinosaurs. They would then put us in the same van, drive us back to school, let us out, and as our parents picked us up, we would tell them all about looking at dinosaurs.
MKUltra was a program done by the CIA in the 1950s and 60s, and within MKUltra, they experimented with trauma-based mind control through the use of electroshock therapy, through the use of mind-altering drugs, through the use of even hypnotic regression and many other techniques to figure out how to control and program human beings.
There was programming at bases. They use military bases because they won't have any interference when they have someone on a military base. And a lot of my programming took place on military bases. I would like to talk about the fact that there are rituals done at the military bases also, and that rituals are not a cover. The people that do the mind control are involved, and rituals are very much a part of how they do things. For example, naval intelligence members or people that are in naval intelligence are usually very involved with Ordo Templi Orientis. And that doesn't mean that everyone in naval intelligence is involved in that. But naval intelligence is responsible for a lot of overseeing of ritual activity in this country. And they are responsible for a lot of this going on. There are other organizations, other agencies involved, but naval intelligence is very involved.
We were taken to some kind of facility out on the Nevada desert, and for a long time I thought it was Area 51. But there was also another underground facility at Tonopah, so either Area 51 or the Tonopah facility was taken to a medical dispensary type of place, and was sat down in a waiting room with the lights off. Everything they did seemed to be to cover memory, to make sure that if anybody did remember anything, being in a room with the lights off, you wouldn't be able to see the people clearly, things like that. I was given fatigues to wear that night, with no rank insignia, no name tags, no identifying marks of any kind. Was forbidden to speak to the other people that I was out there with, beyond what was necessary to run the test. So the situation they put us in was very isolating and very frightening, terrifying actually. And so we got to this facility, we sat down in this waiting room with the lights off, and I still see it really clearly. I could draw a picture. And one by one we had to go off to the side in this little room. Finally they called my name and I went into the little room, and it was a small room. There was a security guard in there in desert camo fatigues wearing a sidearm. He was standing at parade rest, and I was told to lay down on this stainless steel examining table that looked old, like it was maybe from the 40s or 50s. And I laid down on there fully clothed. I didn't have to take anything off. And I waited for a long time with that security guard watching me. And finally some guy in a white lab coat came in, the same door I had gone in to the room in. And he said, "Stay calm," 3 times in this really deadpan, monotone voice. And he walked past the security guard, up the right side of the table, got up to the right side of my head, and then he had a hypodermic needle hidden in the sleeve of his lab coat, and he injected me in the side of the neck right here. And whatever the chemical was went straight to my brain. And so I'm kind of in shock from whatever this injection's doing to me, because it went straight to the brain, and I was like, in shock. Suddenly there's 2 guys on either side of that table pulling me up by the arms and dragging me off the table and down through this doorway where there was a long flight of stairs going down. And for some reason I remember it as one long flight going down, not switchbacks like a lot of store cases are. It was just straight down. They half carried me, half dragged me down those stairs. And at the bottom of the stairs there was like this little room that had a one-way mirror in it, and I went through the effects of that injection in that room, and I felt like I've described it so many ways down through the years. It was kind of like feeling like your body's turning to soda pop fizz or beer foam. It's just like, you know, when your leg goes to sleep and it comes back and there's all the pins and needles and tingling and everything else like that. It was like that was happening to my whole body. But super duper intense, pins and needles. And I just curled up on the floor and just screamed because it was just doing this number on me, you know. And I felt like I was coming apart somehow. I don't know why or how I thought that, but that's how my body felt. It felt like it was just going to come apart and run down a drain in the floor. And I had a feeling that because that mirrored thing on the wall, I think it was a one-way mirror, and they were looking at me through the mirror to watch me go through the effects of this. And I've racked my brain to try to come up with some idea of what this injection was and what it was for. And the only thing I've been able to come up with is maybe they were trying to create a chemical version of ascension.
One of the technologies that I was exposed to while in the MyLab programs were the chemical cocktails they would use on us. They would use them to enhance us in many different ways. Some of the ways that we would be enhanced would be if they discovered we had an intuitive empath ability. There was a cocktail that they would give us that would enhance it, make it many-fold stronger. They would also give cocktails to people that would have hormones in them that would make them stronger, faster, and think quicker. A major part of the program was that when you started, they were not quite sure where they would send you. A lot of the kids that were in these programs, they would end up in different syndicates here on the Earth working for the Cabal, and a small percentage, very small, when you end up going into the secret space program.
Certain children were picked who had certain DNA, and I was connected with that. And what they did was, when we were like 5 and 6 years old, they took us there, and they trained us, and we did. We learned and we trained and we did all sorts of operations when we were there. Now, when I was 5 years old, my parents moved to Los Angeles at the time, out of the blue, and I was living on Sepulveda Boulevard, and the Mars jump rooms for children were on at 999 Sepulveda Boulevard. I now know. So and I didn't know. So I had these memories before I knew that this particular information about these Mars jump rooms on Sepulveda Boulevard. It was a lot of training. So say from 5 years old to 25 years old was spent there, and I know some of the people now who are back here. But what they did then at the end of the Mars, at the end of that thing, is they used age regression technology, brought us back to 5 years old, and then placed us exactly back to where we were.
The reason so few went into the secret space program was that most of the participants, almost all of the participants, are pulled from various military branches. They bring people in to the military, send them through training, testing, find out where their skills lean, and if they have the fortitude for this type of mission, and then they're invited in or drafted in, and they'll serve a 20-year term. And this is referred to as a 20 and back. And after that 20 years, they're actually age regressed and regressed back in time using a technology that was handed to us by non-terrestrials. And then they were buttoned up in time and placed back in their life. And then they finish out the rest of their military term and then return to civilian life, having no memory of serving in the secret space program. The whole point of regressing people back in time after serving in the 20 and back and wiping their memory has to do with a deal that was made with an extraterrestrial group that gave us that technology. There's a Nordic group that are engaged in a time and space battle with a reptilian group. This battle's gone on for many thousands of years.
When delving into this research, some people formulate ideas that there's only good extraterrestrials here or there's only bad extraterrestrials here. But we need to understand that the law of polarity is universal. There's both good or benevolent extraterrestrials here to help us, and there's negative extraterrestrials here to essentially feed off of us and traumatize us into a state of fear. These negative extraterrestrial species involve some gray species. They also involve many reptilian species and many non-physical archonic entities that can also remotely influence and utilize much of that fear energy and traumatized energy that we release.
Towards the end of my training, it started to become pretty clear that I had done very well in the intuitive empath training. I had done very well in the rest of the general training that I was given. And I was starting to be introduced to non-terrestrial beings. So it became very obvious that I was going to be interacting with non-terrestrials, and I assumed it was going to be in an off-world environment. Little did I know that I was going to be drafted in this program when I was 16 years old. And it was during my Christmas break, between the age of 16 and 17 years old. I turned 17 in February. I was taken from my room. I was then taken to Carswell Air Force Base. I was then transported to the moon, where I sat and signed a bunch of papers that were non-disclosures, were just a big stack of papers signing my life away when I wasn't even 17 years old yet. The Lunar Operations Command is a moon base, and it was built out originally by the Germans in the late 1930s, early 1940s. While they were building this complex, they had utilized an ancient alien building that was not too terribly far away. They had found a bunch of these buildings on the moon, and they had found one of the buildings that they were able to patch up with some of the concrete they made from the local regolith. They then were able to pressurize it and use it as a base of operations while they built out the Lunar Operation Command. After a number of years, and after Operation Paperclip, it served its purpose and integrated the Nazis into the military-industrial complex, the LOC was handed over to the Americans. When approaching the moon from Earth in an electrogravitic craft, you will find the moon will be at a distance, and then it will grow very quickly in front of you. And then the next thing you know, you are above the surface. You will then fly in the electrogravitic craft at breakneck speeds, except you don't feel inertia. You find yourself hugging maybe 90 feet, 300 feet above the lunar surface, going at incredible speeds until you reach a crater. And then you find yourself orbiting a crater. The person piloting the craft radios in requesting permission to land. You don't see anywhere to land. All of a sudden, a little haze kind of occurs, and then there's a base. It's the Lunar Operation Command. And as you fly down and over, there is a control tower where they control the air traffic. As you fly around this base to make your final approach, you see a secondary crater. And as you fly down into that crater, it's fairly deep, and you end up popping out into a lava tube section where you immediately see a giant building built into the middle of that lava tube that blocks it. And it's built kind of like the shape of a bell. And it looks like the outside of a battleship almost, the way it's built. You then fly in and land in the bay, and you're now at the Lunar Operation Command.
Well, some of the testimony that's come to me over the last year in particular has been nothing short of startling in terms of the degree to which the space program, the secret space program, has expanded. I've talked to people who have said that there is and has been an ongoing extrasolar planetary colonization program that's been going on for decades and decades. I mean, to the point where one of the people who had actually gone, and this was the claim that he made, that he was on a warp-capable spacecraft that went from here to the edge of the Andromeda Galaxy in 20 minutes, and that when they got there, they located at least 8 Earth-like planets in some of the star systems along the edge of the galaxy, and 8 of those planets had human life on them. They were Earth-sized planets with sun-like stars similar to our sun, at approximately the same distances. They wound up using some kind of radio telemetry sensors to determine which ones were broadcasting in conventional radio and television signals. They found 2 planets like that, 2 of which were speaking English. And the minute I heard this, I thought, well, this is complete baloney, or this system, this whole program has been going on for a lot longer than anybody would have dreamed. But he described seeing cities and roads and cars and people and conventional clothing speaking English. And there's only one way that that's possible, I mean, other than, parallel universe type of a scenario, and that is that the program's been going on for much, much longer.
Right after about the 6-year mark in my 20 and back experience, I found out some very disturbing details that no one on the ship knew about. And, well, almost no one. I was approached by a petty officer Wheeler, someone who I honestly had a crush on, and she used that to her advantage. She needed me and an engineer to help her get into a room, a restricted room, and look into some pods. She wanted to know what was in those pods. She had a bad feeling. Well, we helped her get in, and I was standing watch. She and the engineer opened up one of the pods, and they were cryogenic chambers, and they were full of people that had basically looked like they'd been filleted and cleaned and sent to the market. While I saw this a little bit from a distance, gas was escaping from this pod, and it overcame the petty officer and the engineer, and they collapsed. And as I was turning to run through the door I was watching through, I collapsed. After I came to in the sick bay, they had explained that the 2 others had died in the accident, and that I was being held for debriefing. I was then debriefed, told not to repeat the information to anyone else. If I wasn't a valuable intuitive empath, my fate would have been much different. So they sent me back to my regular duties and told me that from time to time I was going to be pulled over to work on a different deck on a different project. And this project was basically a galactic slave trade. It turned out that for many decades, while we were developing the technology to try to fight some of the negative ETs, there were extraterrestrials that were coming into our solar system, were coming to our planet, would swoop down and kidnap people and leave, and then take them and trade them off into some sort of galactic slave trade that's going on. After a while, the benevolent powers that be decided, you know what, this is a commodity. If we start calling our own people and trading them off to these extraterrestrials, we can get trinkets, we can get technology, we can get biologicals, and that's what happened. They would trade human beings for biological samples, much like what Emery Smith would end up receiving in his lab and doing different experiments on. And they would also get technology, and they would trade the humans off. The humans would go off to be used in any number of ways. Humans are very coveted, not people are only leaving to be food for reptilians. That's a small percentage. Most of them are being used for their skills. Humans are very well known for our engineering, our creativity, our ability to bring things from our mind and create them and engineer them. And strangely enough, we are coveted and used in that fashion. So the Cabal group has been basically utilizing human beings as a resource. So as little groups of people from all of these different programs started to join and work very quietly and secretly to not only find out the full truth of what was going on, but find a way to combat it. The SSP Alliance is a very small fraction of the overall secret space program or secret space programs, under 1%. So the only technology that they have is what they brought with them when they defected. It is a ragtag group that is doing their best to bring full disclosure to humanity. They don't want a slow, protracted disclosure. They want all of these technologies given to all of humanity at once, not to any one group, any one country, to everyone at once. And that is what the Secret Space Program Alliance has been working for.
The collective story that these insiders have shared with me is much bigger than where the UFO community had been going up until then, and thus it has utterly revolutionized the whole basic discussion of what everyone is now talking about. Whether they agree with it or not, everyone has had to deal with the concept of the secret space program.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
On September 10th, 2001, the day before 9/11, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld testified in front of congressmen about $2.3 trillion missing from the Pentagon. In 2015, an Inspector General report came out detailing that number grew from $2.3 trillion to $6.5 trillion missing from the Pentagon. This money is going into unacknowledged projects both above our heads and below ground, into deep underground military bases and secret space programs with technology far beyond what many of us can even realize.
Our black budget, for instance, garners $1.023 trillion every 2 years. It's over $500 billion a year. Right now, there are 131 active deep underground military bases in the United States. There's 1,477 of them worldwide. Each one has an average cost of $17 to $19 billion. Each one is built in the site, it used to be, it'd take a year to 2 years to build each one. And now they're capable of building a couple of them a year. With sophisticated methods. Area 51 is only one base, one of the 131 bases. Of these 131 bases, I call Area 51 a mega base. It's got more than one base in it. It's Tonopah Test Range, Area 51, S2, S4, Groom Lake, and a host of others. Now, these mega bases are gobbling up our gross national product. Right now we're spending 28% of the gross national product on building underground bases solely.
China has built 50 different ghost cities that collectively are built to hold an estimated 64 million inhabitants. The apartment buildings, the roads, all of the infrastructure, all the plumbing, all the electrical, everything you need for a city, and there's nobody there. 50 cities, 64 million people. Now remember, China's gross domestic product is $11.2 trillion. They're not even spending a majority of their gross domestic product on these ghost cities, and yet they have the money to do it. It's only cost them a few $1 trillion. So once you start thinking about it that way, you start to see how much money $1,000 billion really is. $1 billion is a lot. If you're a billionaire, you can do anything you want. $1,000 billion is a sum of money that just gets dropped out there with this word trillion, but we're not really thinking about how it literally can build an entire civilization. The articles on China's ghost cities refer to it as China's multi-billion-dollar debt, not a debt in the trillions. In fact, in 2016, one estimate that I saw showed that the total estimated debt that China has gone into to build these ghost cities is only $2.5 trillion. Now that's 50 different cities that hold 64 million people, just because they think that as they continue to have a population boom, that they need to have a place where these people can eventually go. But literally nobody is there right now. So imagine what that means when you start tossing around a figure of the too big to fail banks needing a bailout that, according to Senator Ron Paul, was $29 trillion. You're talking about over 10 times the amount of money that China needed to build 50 different ghost cities that can hold millions and millions and millions of people. So then the question is, where did all this money go? The total amount of money in the world in the 2008 year of the collapse, the gross world product, or GWP, was only $60 trillion. So the theft of $29 trillion from the printed out of hot air US dollar is half of the wealth of the entire world. Try to wrap your head around this, because what I'm telling you is, from all the insiders I've been speaking to for the last 20 years, they are building civilizations. It's just not above ground where we see it on the surface of the planet. There is vast amounts of underground drilling. There are huge caverns, 20, 30 miles wide, that they've built out into gorgeous, elaborate cities, and they're building entire civilizations on planets and moons in our solar system. This is where the money is going.
Well, I have a copy of the Inspector General Act here in front of me, and it says, among other things, that it's your responsibility to conduct and supervise audits and investigations relating to the programs and operations of your agency.
That's correct.
So I'm asking you if your agency has, in fact, according to Bloomberg, extended $9 trillion in credit, which, by the way, works out to $30,000 for every single man, woman, and child in this country. I'd like to know, if you're not responsible for investigating that, who is?
At this point, we're conducting our lending facility project at a fairly high level and have not gotten to a specific level of detail to really be in a position to respond to your question.
Have you conducted any investigation or auditing of the losses that the Federal Reserve has experienced on its lending since last September?
We're still in the process of conducting that review. Until we actually, go out and gather the information, I'm not in a position to really respond to the specific question.
So are you telling me that nobody at the Federal Reserve is keeping track on a regular basis of the losses that it incurs on what is now a $2 trillion portfolio?
Until we actually look at the program and have the information, we are not in a position to say whether there are losses or to respond in any other way to that particular.
Mr. Chairman, my time is up, but I have to tell you honestly, I am shocked to find out that nobody at the Federal Reserve, including the Inspector General, is keeping track of this.
What's amazing is that right now we're seeing the very first audit of the Pentagon ever. And this audit could very well begin to expose the trillions and trillions, upwards of even 21 trillion, if not more money than that, begin to be exposed. And we might even find out very soon where all this money actually went.
Let's go back now to the LIBOR scandal that happened in the wake of the 2008 economic collapse. LIBOR is an acronym that stands for London Interbank Offered Rate. And what we're finding is that these too big to fail banks are only appearing to be in competition with each other. The LIBOR scandal revealed that these guys are calling each other on the phone, colluding about how to rig their own interest rates so that one appears to be winning, one appears to be losing, but they're actually like branch offices of a single larger corporation. All of the apparent competition, oh, these guys' stock is going down, oh, it's a bloodbath. No. They're doing all this together. They're competing only on paper when in fact it's collusion. This is financial organized crime on such a massive scale, How can you arrest all the banks? They're too big to fail. This gets into a law that was passed in the United States in 1970 called the RICO Act, which stands for Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations. And that act was built to be able to take down massively organized crime. None of this really makes sense until you get back into the idea of the Federal Reserve System. Now, up until the Federal Reserve was founded in 1913, the United States essentially was in control of its own currency. This same banking cartel that we've been talking about worked behind the scenes to create a series of fake economic crises in the late 1800s and early 1900s, which caused regular Americans to have their savings wiped out. This became such a crisis that people were desperately calling for reform. And then the government comes along and says, look, we're bribed, corrupt politicians. We don't really know what we're doing. They have spokespeople saying these kinds of things in the media. Let's bring in the investors. Let's bring in the British bankers, the people who really know how to make money. They've been doing it for a long time. They're not just going to hold an office for a few years and go disappear. They are the guys who really understand how to run a financial system. So what did we do? We handed over the issuance of American currency to a private corporation of private bankers. When you see Federal Reserve note on the US dollar, that means it's printed by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, since they came into power just over a century ago, has eroded the purchasing power of the US dollar by 99%. So what was really going on there? Do you think that these investors built up the equity of the United States, made us more profitable? It's exactly the opposite. We have been living in a prolonged economic depression. They just don't call it that because the metrics that we use to measure the economy are coming from a rigged system, just like we saw with LIBOR. Don't bother to look at the Dow Jones. Don't bother to look at the NASDAQ. That has nothing to do with the reality of everyone else and how hard it has become to earn a living. The complete wiping out of the middle class. You have rich and you have poor. And even among the rich, you then have super rich people where a concentrated small cluster of individuals have so much wealth that it could feed entire nations, entire peoples. So this is something that is an economic inequality that must be addressed, and the only way that we're ever really going to learn this is by a collective, massive understanding.
I say the elite powers in control, which is really the same as these central banking dynasties that are basically sitting over the nations. They are a form of global government, except that they are not government at all. They're just dominants. They are dominants. They are the ones that issue the orders to all the nations. As we saw clearly in 1947, after Roswell, we saw these elite powers in control issue these orders to all the nations that anything real that comes up in regards to alien visitors or UFOs must immediately be covered up at all costs, no matter what. And that was first. That was how that wall, the embargo of truth, that Berlin Wall, went up originally in 1947, and that's an example of them in action over the nations. And that's the reason why disclosure and the images that conjures up in our minds is not a real thing, really, because the nations, whether you're talking about the United States or any place else, they don't have the actual agenda of aliens to reveal. They're not on the inside of that. They really aren't. Nations just follow orders. That's all they do. And that's what they're doing now, and that's what they always do. And when you see them all doing something strange or something that seems out of the ordinary, it's because they're following the orders of the elite powers in control.
We stand at the birth of a new millennium, ready to unlock the mysteries of space, to free the Earth from the miseries of disease, and to harness the energies, industries, and technologies of tomorrow. A new national pride will stir our souls, lift our sights, and heal our divisions. It's time to remember that old wisdom our soldiers will never forget. that whether we are black or brown or white, we all bleed the same red blood of patriots.
After the inauguration, the president signed a number of secret memorandums stating that he wanted the release of advanced technology, and a lot of this technology was involved in the space program, and he was very aware of it. We know that President Trump is aware of advanced technologies because his uncle was the one who went in and cleared out the safe of Tesla after his death. So we are fairly sure that President Trump grew up bouncing on his uncle's knee, hearing stories of free energy. Aside from the Secret Space Program Alliance, we have a different alliance. It is made up of all of these countries that have been fighting against this cabal for 50 years or so. It is also made up of various military groups that have broken away from the cabal, such as elements of the United States military intelligence groups have broken away and have been participating with a lot of other breakaway groups in trying to overthrow the cabal who took over the United States back in the 1960s, around 1963. This alliance, Earth Alliance, began to get more and more organized. And they got organized to a point to where some of them approached some generals and told them that they wanted to do an open coup in the United States. These generals decided they would make one last ditch attempt to get rid of the cabal legally. And that's when they approached Trump, allegedly, to run for president and allow them to legally get the country back, basically.
The alliance is an international group. It is a confederacy. There are lots of different factions, some of which agree, some of which do not agree, about the only thing that they all have in common is they want to see this satanic, pedophile, elitist cabal come down in flames. They do not want these people trying to kill off most of the planet, trying to control all of this immensely high technology. The alliance also consists of a surprising majority now of personnel in the U.S. military and in the U.S. intelligence community. So we're going to have to deal with the fact, sooner or later, and probably sooner, that not everybody in the government is bad. This is part of the psyop that was put out through movies and through media to get us to completely distrust all levels of society, all of the institutions, so that no one will ever be able to oppose these people. You're not going to do this by a bunch of keyboard warriors on the internet. They're not going to actually take the solid action that needs to be taken. What you do need to see is what we now are counting up in August 2018 as 45,000 sealed indictments. Now, this is on the official U.S. government court record. You can go to the pacer.gov website, which lists all of the lawsuits and all of the indictments filed in all of the different districts in America, and just count up the sealed indictments. The official count, the undisputed count, is 45,000, and the normal number for any given year is approximately 1,000. Now, this is a very, very big story that people are really not seeing exactly how awesome this is. Let's talk about what do you have to do to get a sealed indictment. Okay, a sealed indictment is the result of a secret grand jury proceeding. Now, what is a secret grand jury? A secret grand jury requires a panel of 12 to 23 U.S. citizens who are then given information and testimony from a prosecutor. The prosecutor is prosecuting a particular individual who is not invited to the proceedings, has no idea this is going on. And in legal terms, that's called ex parte. So he or she is testified against by the prosecutor, And then the jury has to decide if there is sufficient cause to prosecute this person with a crime, in which case they file a sealed indictment. The indictment stays off the record. You don't get to know the person's name until they unseal it, at which point the person is immediately arrested. And then they get to have the regular trial by jury with a judge. But you have to understand that the prosecutor is either a federal U.S. attorney, a county district attorney, or a state attorney general. These are big, big league players. This is not some attorney that you hire in Podunk, okay? These are major players creating major indictments. And the reason why they do it this way is that they're prosecuting organized crime. Typically, that's what it is. They're prosecuting a larger ring where they can't indict one person at a time. They have to get all their ducks in a row. They have to line it all up so that when they unseal the indictments, everybody gets arrested at once, and there's no ability for them to tip each other off that something happened so that the rats can flee off of the sinking ship. They all get nailed at once.
The phenomenon known as Q, or QAnon, came onto the scene at the very end of October 2017, and what essentially occurred is that a group that called themselves Q began posting on anonymous online image boards called 4chan and 8chan. And what they were posting was a lot of questions, a lot of suggestions, a lot of very interesting and intriguing data sets that essentially laid out a real-time takedown of the deep state by alliance and white hat groups behind the scenes.
As the QAnon briefings recently stated, these indictments are going to be like Watergate times 1,000. We've never seen anything like this in the history of the world. Some of the most recent QAnon briefings, which our insiders have told us is coming from the Alliance, have said that there are many, many figures in the controlled mainstream media who are in these indictments as well. So Harvey Weinstein is just the beginning. And isn't it interesting that when Harvey Weinstein was finally arrested, in his hand he had the biography of Elia Kazan, who was a guy in early Hollywood history who was brought in during the McCarthy investigations and sang like a songbird and ratted out many other people in Hollywood. And Weinstein has now said he is doing the same thing and that everybody in Hollywood was doing the same stuff that he was doing. So he was upset about why he got singled out. So once these indictments become unsealed, this will be the fulfillment of the mass arrest scenario that I have been leaking on my website since 2009.
The only two indictments that we've had unsealed so far involved the cult group NXIVM, the founder of NXIVM, Keith Raniere, and one of his understudies, the actress Allison Mack. These are the only two unsealed court records so far. And their unsealed indictments actually labeled child sex trafficking on them. And NXIVM has found to be a hotbed of cult activity, of ritual abuse, and of child sex abuse even. So if these are the only two records that have been unsealed so far, and they are taking down names of this caliber with charges of this caliber, we can only imagine what the rest of these unsealed indictments are going to show us.
This is nothing new. It didn't start with the QAnon briefings, has nothing to do with who's president of the United States right now. This is a decades-long effort in the making, and they have tried and tried and tried in various ways to get this to work. They've had consistent failures, and now they're being much more systematic and much more methodical. It's all going to be done legally. All of the indictments are totally bona fide, and it's just that once this finally happens, it will be something we have never seen before in all of American history, a true second American Revolution.
One of the things I learned as an FBI agent is not that I learned to believe in conspiracies more. What I learned to know is when I am caught up in a river of deception and everybody else around me is being taken on the same current and we're all being taken in one direction, and suddenly one guy has to stick his head up and say, this isn't right. This is all wrong. We're all just being fed garbage and we're not being told the truth. Well, how is it that technology in today's age, our technology has moved forward by leaps and bounds in so many areas, yet we're still driving, the entire world is still driving automobile that function essentially on the same technology that they have for 100 years. 100 years, and we're still using fossil fuels to fill up our gas tanks. How is that possible? That has not moved forward hardly one iota. I mean, they blend the stuff sometimes, but I mean, essentially, technology has been stuck for 100 years. Well, that's because that's one of the economic factors from the globalists that is so dead set against distributing real energy, which is free energy, which we know was discovered during Tesla's time.
So Nikola Tesla is known, of course, for delving into free energy or zero-point energy sciences, but funny enough, near the end of Nikola Tesla's life, he was actually delving into anti-gravity research. And unfortunately, Tesla didn't have enough time nor money towards the end of his life to be able to continue his research into anti-gravity, but he passed along his knowledge to a man named Otis Carr. And funny story about that, Nikola Tesla was staying in a hotel in New York near the end of his career, and during his stay at this hotel, he befriended one of the workers that was there, and that was Otis Carr. And they courted a relationship, and Nikola Tesla actually felt comfortable enough to begin sharing some of his research with Otis Carr. Now, Otis Carr then went, after Nikola Tesla's passing, to develop this research out a little bit more so, and Otis Carr actually developed what was called the OCT-X1, I believe, and it was actually a flying saucer craft that was piloted with the consciousness of the individual, and he did, supposedly, actual experiments that were successful in navigating both space and time with this craft. So we could say Otis Carr actually was the first person to develop begin to develop a civilian-based space program. But he was essentially run out of business and was not able to continue the work he was doing because the military-industrial complex suppressed his work.
But the same forces that destroyed that, I mean, at that time, supposedly it was Thomas Edison, who was a part of the global system. I mean, he was the original fossil fuels and normal electricity system, and he was just a front man to destroy Tesla and destroy his because the efforts to destroy his patents came from national government, not just Edison and his private conglomerate that had billions of dollars even at that time. And the reason for that is why? Because this effort to repress free energy was coming from the elite powers in control, the ones that sit on top of everybody and tell everybody, we got to stop this. And what we're seeing today, of course, is that free energy is like a dam that they're sprouting leaks, and it's getting ready to burst forward because it is coming, and it's coming really soon because it's been out there for so long. And I think we're getting to the point where it is going to come forward, and it's going to come forward maybe from several sources at the same time because the pressure has built up so much from so many different sources. So I think we are going to get it very soon.
I was asked to give a paper at Vandenberg Air Force Base to the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And their normal request would have been, tell us how you're trying to get new business using advanced technology. In other words, that was my job, to run 250 guys with different disciplines to try to get new business. But instead, I surprised them by saying, I want to give a talk called The Giant Discoveries of Future Science. And there was a moment of silence, and okay. So I developed this talk, and in this talk, what I established was I distinguished the difference between engineering and science. Engineers being people who want to build something and make it work. They don't really care how to get there. And the scientists who want to know the, quote, truth. Mm-hmm. And I made that distinction, and then I gave examples of 10 scientific facts that are essentially established you know, that the Earth evolved by gradual processes, and that there Maxwell's equations are the right answer, and Einstein's E equals mc squared, that was all good. And then I took these 10 greatest achievements by the 10 scientists and asked, what can we tell about these 10? And the interesting thing was that you could tell 3 things. Number one, not a single one of them was known in the field. Number two, every single one of them had been criticized by their peers as being stupid or charlatans. And number three, the average age was 23 when they made their discovery. So I took that thought and wrote down a list of what I thought were the 12 greatest discoveries of the future that we had to attack. And the first one was how the UFOs work. The second was time travel. Well, not time travel was towards the end, but the processes of the brain and the mind, psychic discoveries, psychokinesis, that sort of thing, and a bunch of those things were on the list. And the amazing thing is that today, in 2017, I am satisfied that my list that I said would maybe, and I give a probability of discovering these things, 20 years from now, my list was essentially already discovered, every single one, including time travel, at the time that I gave this paper.
My engine's complete. I rebuilt it. I have the entire package setting and outsourced on the servers around the planet. Upon my death, the servers dump everything onto the web. And I mean everything. Blueprints, schematics, diagrams, list of materials, list of tools, list of suppliers that will help you get the tools, dimensions, 3-dimensional working models. You'll be able to any normal lab would be able to reconstruct this thing, get the same results I did. And I want that done because that will be validation of technology. But once it's built, it's not going to sit there. They're going to use it. And I expect in a year's time, once that kind of technology is dumped, they build it, they start using it, oil is reduced to a lubricant planet-wide, and that's it. That's the first step. Imagine what happens next. I don't want to be around. That's the reason it would be a media circus, and I just not into that. So I'll just leave it behind, and y'all can play with it and do with what you want.
So how do we hear all of this information and not feel disempowered? How does it not feel hopeless? Well, I look back when I start to feel hopeless to the reports of legitimate ET contacts that have occurred in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. In all of those reports, the ETs asked 2 things: grow spiritually or expand your consciousness, and demand the release of suppressed technologies from your governments. Those are the 2 things that we can focus on. If we begin to organize and demand the release of suppressed technologies, they will have no choice. If we focus inwardly on whatever our religion is, becoming the best human being that we can, and expanding our consciousness beyond our comfortable belief systems, when we do those 2 things, we are going to gain the freedom that we desire.
I started realizing that the cabal or the Illuminati or whatever you want to call them, they keep us fighting with each other intentionally because they know that the potential in our unified consciousness, should we ever come together and stop fighting with each other, is extremely powerful. And they have been using that energy against us, like farming and managing our consciousness in such a way that we spin out a version of reality from the thoughts they program into us that makes the Matrix, just like in the Matrix films. And so we have made the Matrix that's our prison. We made it from our consciousness and our thought that's been managed, farmed, programmed, and controlled. And if that's true, then we have the power within ourselves to come together and stop fighting with each other and remake the world. And emotion is key. We're not taught anything about how to deal with our emotions in this world. It's like a big black hole, and we just spurt emotional energy all over the place like an out-of-control garden hose. You know, would we waste money like that in most cases? Would we waste gasoline in our car that way? No. Well, we need to look at our emotional energy the same way, because that's the big key. And we have powerful emotions as human beings, and that means a lot of emotional power. But the only way we can wield it is to come together and find our commonalities and build on those, and stop looking at our ideologies that might divide us and our beliefs that might divide us. We've got to come together. We've got to focus on the fact we're all human beings. We all have hearts and souls and conscience. And we need to look at what brings us together, and then we need to take the emotional energy of that love and connection and make that really, really powerful, and then release it intentionally in waves of consciousness, energy, and power that can remake this world and the matrix it's based on in ways that we want for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren, for all the animals in the environment. We can remake it just through the power of consciousness. We can get full disclosure just through the power of consciousness. But we can only wield this energy together, and we can only wield it with love for each other and the planet.
We're at the early stages of this movement, and every movement, you know, whether we're talking about the civil rights movement, the abolition movement, you know, the women's rights movement, it's always, once it reaches a kind of like a critical mass, then the political changes happen.
So this is a very, very compelling story. I do believe that it's time for all of us to take a stand. We cannot simply step back and allow all these things to happen. Even if we don't fully believe everything that the people in this movie and other insiders like them have been saying, it's worthy of our consideration. Can we really afford to be so ignorant as to turn our backs on this information? We don't have the time to sit around and argue about whether this information is true. The planet is dying. We have economic collapse. We have mass starvation. We have the largest mass extinction since the collapse of the dinosaurs. Our ecosphere is collapsing. We see the lack of water. We see ever-increasing global temperatures, and no one really is doing anything about it. The entrenched power structure stays the way it is. We're still burning fossil fuels. We're still not getting access to these amazing technologies. If we do get full disclosure, now the dam breaks. Now we're in a totally new reality, which very well could be the golden age that was promised to us in so many different ancient teachings and traditions. I do believe that in our lifetimes we will see the full disclosure of the so-called forbidden technology. We will become a truly galactic civilization, and we will do this with the cooperation of people in the military, people in the intelligence community, people who were working for the cabal and have decided to break away from all that, become insiders, and be the change that we want to see in the world. This film is an embodiment of that global movement. This film is the red pill that wakes you up to what's really going on in the world. They do not have the staff to fight us. The cabal is losing. We are on the winning side of history. We are moving forward step by step, and at some point this is all going to break open. So when we raise consciousness, when we come together as a group, when we create this initiative, when we define what we want, by having that be our state of mind, we are literally transforming this planet into the golden oasis that it was always supposed to be, and the breathtaking future that we have been hearing about from so many ancient traditions. Whether you want to call it ascension, the golden age, whatever it is, I do believe it's possible, and it is up to us to co-create this amazing reality.
Power in defense of freedom is greater than power in behalf of tyranny and oppression, because power, real power, comes from our convictions, which produce uncompromising action. Every daring attempt to make a great change in existing conditions, every lofty vision of new possibilities for the human race has been labeled utopian. Like it or not, everything is changing. The result will be the most wonderful experience in the history of humanity or the most horrible enslavement that you can imagine. We must draw our strength from the very despair in which we have been forced to live. We were born with potential. We were born with goodness and trust. We were born with ideals and dreams. We were born with greatness. We are the universe in ecstatic motion, and it does not require many words to speak the truth. The ultimate end of all revolutionary social change is to establish the sanctity of human life, the right of every human on the planet to liberty and well-being. Do not allow yourself to get lost in the fear of change. Remember, the wound is the place where the light enters you. We are here to laugh at the odds and live our lives so well that death will tremble to take us.
Very importantly, I'm hereby directing the Department of Defense and Pentagon to immediately begin the process necessary to establish a Space Force as the 6th branch of the armed forces. That's a big statement.
If you are willing to come forward with information regarding suppressed technologies, you can do so anonymously through secretspaceprogram.com. We have end-to-end encrypted communication options available and a Tor site that supports dead drops of any file types.